The news had a huge impact on my life, gave me a profession to care about. It introduced me to people that I cared about, some of my best friends still today, and also eventually to my future wife. And it also brought me to a fascinating place, the Comstock, and particularly Gold Hill. I spent most of those 3 years living in Gold Hill. I lived in 4 different places in Gold Hill, which might be some kind of a record. I first came to Nevada from New York State, where I was raised near Buffalo, and then in Ithaca, New York. Went to Hamilton College there, and that's where I met my friend John Cobby. We were classmates. And in the summer of '67, he invited me to come out with him to Carson City to visit his godfather. And we did that, had a great adventure that summer. John's godfather was Don Bowers, who was editor of Nevada Magazine, really kind of the founder of the modern magazine. And he introduced us to all his friends. We met him at various parties and things. And one of those was David Toll, who was writing for Don and the magazine. In fact, stories about the Comstock in particular. Say, go ahead 7 years, May and June of '74. And John and I were both went back to being students, and we lived in these little apartments in Ralston Street in Reno while going to the university for, John went for ag, I went for journalism. And during that time, I remember right around that, I think it was in May, John came back with this wild story about how he had been stopped by Story County cops, brought to the Virginia City Jail, and he's only to be rescued by David Toll, of course, and Jan Maximo, who he had been visiting on that weekend. And he was able to be released through their efforts. And we did not know it at the time, but that was one of the reasons, an impetus of many, I guess, that led to David and his friends, Peter Loffer, Chandler Laughlin, Buckeye Blake, to start the Gold Hill News. Right about that time, I went to San Francisco to look for a job after going to J school for a year. And when I came back, the first issue apparently had already been out, and David had left a note on my door, said, come up and work for the News. So I did. And I put things in my truck, drove up here. Very few things in my truck. It was one of those times when you didn't have much. And I was ended up finding a place to stay where David and Jan had worked it out with Charlie, who had the rock shop just right down below their house. It was a interesting place. I had a little room off to the side. It had a sink and a bathroom. Under the sink, there was a black widow who lived there for 2 or 3 weeks. And right outside the wall of the room was a corral where Charlie had his jackass named Jasper. And every morning at 5:30 in the morning, he would bang on the wall right near my head where I was sleeping. And so it was like the perfect alarm clock. And Charlie also had a rooster who used to chase people. And every once in a while I'd be in there, or anybody who could be in the rock shop, and they'd hear people screaming outside as they ran from the rooster. So it was a pretty interesting place. And it was quite interesting inside, where we started doing some of our work down there and layouts and meetings. And we were doing it around these cases that had rocks and minerals in them, a lot of cobwebs. And in one case, there was a wedding cake. And on the top of it was inscribed, Rock Shop Charlie marries Pirate Annie. And there was kind of a piece of the cake had been taken out and eaten. And it was in there, it was like the wedding cake and Great Expectations of Miss Haversham. It was just the weirdest thing. And people would come in for interviews, like candidates for election, and they'd see the cake, and I mean, it was pretty funny. So it was an interesting conversation starter. David had hired me because supposedly I knew a lot about journalism, and I'd been taking classes for a year. As it was, I was a neophyte. I didn't know, beans about things somewhat. But I did learn a very big lesson the first week I was working. I came on just before the second issue was being put together, and David entrusted myself and Jim Crandall, who had just started also as Dayton Valley Bureau Chief, to go down to down to Sparks really, to the Tribune, where we laid it out and had the paper printed. Well, while we were down there, I neglected all the wonderful things they did with the first issue to make it look a little rustic, using clip art, great headlines, things like that. And I made it into your average suburban weekly with horizontal layouts and pretty stuffy headlines. And poor Jim, I didn't force us to do it, but I just said, well, we do try it this way. When we came back, I was hoping David would be very happy, and he was not happy. But he was always very, very good about, he didn't fly off the handle very often or really get on you. He patiently went through what we needed to do the next time. Go back to what they first started. And there was a very big lesson. Should have asked more questions, and I should have been more loose. It was a very interesting experience. One of the things that was interesting to learn was a kind of a different way of reporting. There were different different expressions we'd use. Say like Steve Briganti's house, which is later became that photo where everybody was photographed out in front of pretty worn out, but a proud house. But it was never called a house. It would be the Briganti Mansion, or if it was a big house, it would be an estate. If the Golden Gate Bar down in Silver, which had some rooms upstairs, it wasn't just a bar, it was a resort hotel. And if you had some scraggly tomato plants, it was a splendid crop. So it was really a lot of fun. So to learn things differently that way. So I ended up, I do want to say was one of the things that realized recently, in fact, my wife Barbara mentioned, was really the news was like the social media of the day. The news very quickly was popular locally, people read it, and they found out what was happening, not just what was going on at the last commissioners meeting, but where is the dance going to be, or a bar saying 15-cent drafts this week, things like that. So it was what everybody looked to. It's been replaced by a cell phone now, but it's fun to think of it that way and enjoy it. As a reporter, David basically set me up to be the general reporter for Virginia City, from Virginia City down to Silver City. Jimmy covered Dayton real well, of course, and David did a huge amount writing himself in Virginia City and Silver and Gold Hill. It was interesting navigating between the two, for instance, Virginia City and Silver. Very different towns, different history. Also, Virginia City being a little more conservative, maybe not just a little more, and Silver City being basically being a hair that was largely, there was a large long hair population, you might say. And it was interesting to see the news. It was great because the news covered all 4 towns very carefully, very extensively. We tried to mix it up. Virginia City, Gold Hill, Silver City, Dayton. And that was really fun. It was a challenge, but to have that kind of mix and give everybody equal weight in the paper so that one town didn't think they were totally neglected. It happened once in a while, but not too often. And it was fun being a reporter too, because being a reporter gives you the excuse to ask a lot of questions. You go to meetings, they never deferred to me, I wouldn't say that, but they accepted the fact that you were there. And after a while, people would get more comfortable with you as a reporter. One of my main missions was walking up and down C Street looking for stories 2 or 3 times a week at least, which meant, of course, going to the bars, shops along the street. I also did cover the Story County meetings. We also certainly going to down to Silver City. That was quite interesting. Going to the courthouse was interesting. Often would see, for instance, checking with the sheriff's office. We'd had a couple of editorials about the sheriff's office, and sometimes that wasn't, a real cheerful stop, but after a while it worked out fine. And go to the different departments, DAs, the building department, see what was happening. Going upstairs, it was actually mostly women upstairs at that time. The clerk's office, recorders, and there's one other one I'm missing, and they were very easy to deal with. I think they read the newspaper, and they trusted us, or at least thought we were okay. I think after a while, it was interesting too, because we would do the writing up here, but then we went down to Sparks to do the layout and do the printing. We were coming out bi-weekly, so this would be every 2 weeks. And I was kind of joking that the other reason David hired me, which was kind of a bogus reason that I supposedly knew about journalism, but a good one was that I had a well-operating truck it was a 71 Chevy pickup truck, which in 74 seemed like it was brand new. And sometimes there would be 4 of us in the front seat of the truck driving down to Sparks and going down Greiger Grade. We'd be drinking coffee in the morning, usually have a 6-pack of beer to drive home with in the afternoon with the newspapers. And it was so that was good. The truck really helped. I do remember one time David and I went down in his old truck, and the truck, it was old GMC, and it kind of down near the Grange Hall down below, and at the bottom of Geiger, it just kind of quit. I forget why, but we had some beers in the truck, and we just kind of waited. It was about 3 in the afternoon, and I wasn't really worried, but David said, I know somebody's going to come along. And sure enough, Rin Wright, who was the boyfriend and later husband of Karen Wright, who worked for the newspaper, happened to come by, and Rin was a great mechanic, and he figured out what was wrong, and we were on our way. It was just that kind of a life. It was wonderful. It was hard for a lot of the staff. I had it easy, but in terms of financial rewards, we got $25 a week, and after a while, David worked this out, applying for food stamps. So a bunch of us went one after the other, maybe even together, down to the food stamp office at the state in Carson City, and they were really pretty cool about it. They said, what we want you to do is to get help this get your, to be healthy, to make this business work. And if the business works, then you don't have to have the food stamps anymore. We said, good. And so that it was kind of odd, but it was well worth it. It was pretty tough. The relative scarcity of finances was really tough on the staff who were married and or had kids. That was very tough. Dave and Jan, I mean, I couldn't believe it how they welcomed us constantly. We were in their house all the time. They were very patient, but I'm sure it was a tough thing. Darlene had kids. Jim and Lila had Lila's kids, and later their son Ira. So anyway, it was not easy. Really the ones who, I should say that, sorry about the break here, but David was our leader, obviously, and he was a great guy, great friend for all the rest of my life, and he was a great writer, but he was very patient with those of us who weren't, and that was really great. There was one time that I did a story on the headline was Ross Regains Resort, when Graham Ross and Cleo got the Golden Gate back after some people were renting it or leasing it, failed and decided to leave. And I wrote up the story, but David took it and he rewrote it. It was one of about the only times he really did it. And he made it just so funny. It was great. So one person who could keep up with David pretty well, but was just getting into the game was Jim Crandall. He did great. He had David's knack for a good lead and good quotes, and he just did really well. He also had the benefit of his mate Lila, who grew up in Dayton. She had all sorts of good story ideas, I'm sure. Also, who is another really great writer was Roseanne DeCristoforo. She and her husband David lived Silver City, then Dayton, I think, at different times. But Roseanne was a really good writer. She won 2 really major Press Association awards during those 3 years, as did Jimmy, won 2 awards, and would kind of, I think, joked now that they were award machines. You know, they were really good. I mean, David won 1 or 2 more, but they were awfully good. Another one who won an award was Bob Elston from Silver, who was a really good contributor. I was going to mention, and one of the great things is that was great for everybody, that David created a really, you almost want to call it a culture of collectiveness or something. Sounds like, so this is, I don't want it to sound like the Soviet Union or something, but it was really great. Everybody had a say in things, generally speaking, and it was a collective effort. It was really great. Some of the other people who I just want to mention who were just outstanding were, we had the ones who held it together, really, really, really held it together, were Jan, Darlene Nickerson, Lila, Leanna McNeely, Susan Germino, Karen Wright, ones who worked in advertising and or the business side of things. They were really great. Also, I have to certainly a nod to David's father, Carol, who took over the books at one time. I used to kid him, it isn't keeping the books like a game of golf. It's never quite perfect. And he'd say, no, it has to be perfect, you know. So we used to drive him nuts, you know, with no receipts and spending spending money we earned got in the bar for a declassified ad. Sometimes I just take that money and put gas in the truck so I could get around. So he was great. We had great photography with Ron Core, Mike Cassidy, Bill Germino, and then Gary Elam was a tremendous photographer for the last 3 years, and also Denise Gomez from Silver did actually some very good photography. The art, of course, with Dan Murray, Steve Saylor of Dayton, well known, Steve Powell, who's from Virginia City, the younger brother of Pierce Powell, a famous Virginia City resident, Kenny Uhas, whose brother Daniel was a famous Silver City resident, and of course a lot of contributions from people like Buckeye Blake and Jim McCormick. Then we had special columns a little bit, well, throughout, certainly Squaw Tom, who was great. He was great to get to know him. I learned from him he would walk around up at World Headquarters and look for nails. It was a pretty good idea because there were a lot of nails in any of these houses and driveways, and you get it stuck in your tire. You had to get a new tire. So Rocky Adamson from Dayton, the old Mustanger, he won. Both he and Tom won best columnists, I think, awards. Also, we had John Packer came on. He was South Bureau Chief and wrote about things at South Lake Tahoe. David Fenimore did similar at North Lake Tahoe, and they were just really good writers and great columns. I should remember Mike Murphy, who did dispatches from Tonopah. Mike he was a relative old timer, but he had some great stories. And then we had also Denny Jones, who was, I'm not sure if he came through Gary Elam or David met him through somebody else, but Denny was unfortunately had to go to prison, to the Nevada State Prison, to the max, sentenced for some time. And he was an inmate, I think it was 12046. And he wrote great columns about prison life down at the max. And I don't think they interfered with him too much. They were really well written. And after the news, Denny got a job. I mean, after he got out, I think he probably helped use his columns at the news to get a job at the Sparks Tribune. And he worked in journalism for quite a while. I did want to say that one of the great parts of the newspaper were letters. The letters was a great section in the paper. Some people went to the letters first. A lot of readers did that. Sometimes we'd have so many letters that would take up 2 or 3 pages. One of the great things was, I did want to mention, where there were a couple of instances that exemplified it. Often the letters generated their own news and follow-up letters. One came in 1974 with there was an anonymous woman we don't know where from, might have been Silver. Actually, somebody knows who she is. I just don't know her. I just never learned myself. And she said, the Comstock ladies, they look after themselves and they try to present themselves in a fashionable and good way. But the men, they're pretty bad. They're grossly negligent about how they think women would find them appealing. And we got lots of letters. That was just, it was like its own roller coaster, and it was just terrific. And then we had a wonderful, one of the great replies, I have to say, is from Steve Lloyd, also known as Bear, of course, who wrote back about how he had turned over a new leaf, and he was working he even went to the thrift shops to find out what the latest fashions were. He'd got new shirts and even ironed his shorts, and that brought a whole new wave of reactions. It was really great. So that was a lot of fun. I did want to mention a couple of stories that I remember fondly. One was the awards banquets we would go to each year. The first year in '75, they would be giving out the awards for the previous year, and we won a whole bunch of awards, really surprised people. A bunch of us went down. David got up, he gave this great speech, extemporaneous, just great speech, introduced us all, and we all stood up. That was really wonderful. And the next year we went to Lovelock, which was a lot of fun. I think it took place in the Lutheran church, but the Mormon church did all the cooking and the banquet. And then we all went to the main casino. Name is at the tip of my tongue, and everybody partied all night. It was a lot of fun. And then on the third banquet, at least that I went to, we were going to Ely, and we met at the news office on the Friday morning, I think it was. And we were supposed to have 8 of us and 2 vehicles. Well, it turned out to be 6 of us in one Datsun pickup. It was David Fenimore's, and we ended up, there were 5 of us. We met him, David, Darlene, and John Cobby, myself, and David Fenimore. And we went down and picked up Jimmy Crandall at his house. And so there were 3 of us in the front seat, 3 in the back. We just had the funniest time. People were fighting to get into the back by the end. And we stopped at Fallon for breakfast, Austin for a morning toddy, and rolled into Ely. We just had a great time. That was a really memorable trip. Another thing that I remember fondly, or not fondly exactly, but it was kind of unusual, was we went to see Joe Conforti one time. I think it was in '75, and David had talked to him, and partly to get some interviews with him, and also with the Cabin in the Sky and other businesses to see about advertising. And that was a lot of fun. It was his place was up in Sparks, up on Sullivan Drive, maybe near where the new Hug High is now. And they had the pool. I think a couple of girls were there. Gary Elam was there, took photographs, and we hung out with Joe, and it was just kind of a trip. And then it really paid off later, where we took a break from in 1975 into 1976, and when we came back, it was right after the Oscar Bonavena shooting at Mustang. And I always remember we had 3 weeks before the first new issue came out in June '76, and David tracked down Joe and got an exclusive interview just before we went, pretty much toward the end, where we were making up the paper. And I remember he was in Sparks, I think, or wherever he found Joe, and a bunch of us were at the end of the trail, and Dave called the bar to let us know that he'd gotten the scoop. And he had his tape recorder, and we took turns listening over the phone and listening to it. That was just the best. And then when the paper came out, it appeared, the front page appeared on Channel 8 in Reno. It might have appeared on others too. And David's interview got, picked up, was quoted around the country. It was really, that was quite memorable. Anyway, and kind of winding up, I do want to say that the news, as I said, it was an honor being on the news. One night recently, I thought of the news was many things besides being social media. it was a reflection of what is going on during that period. Music, lots of music was going on, art, political things. It was also an instigator through the editorials, which David wrote almost all of them, some really great ones. The letters, different things we did in the paper, instigated things. It was also a bridge between the towns. We'd like to think at least we were trying to get people in the towns to appreciate each other a little bit. I mean, not quite. That we hope that they would appreciate them just by seeing them in the news. And then also as a chronicler, we had a record for 3 years, most of 3 years, a record of every sewer meeting that went on, every rock and roll dance, every dog that was stung by a porcupine was covered in the news for 3 years. And that was really got a lot of satisfaction out of that. So that's about it for me, or that's concludes my notes anyway.
Well, yeah, that's just so wonderful. Like, what a great time capsule the Gold Hill News was, but then your memories of it was a great time capsule of the news.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Thank you for sharing those. That's wonderful.
Okay.
I did have a few questions, if you'd
sure.
mind, and then you're going to show us a few things.
If there's enough time, do you think so?
Yeah, it's
I don't want to. Okay.
One quick, I'll just make one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, how did the working at the news influence the rest of your life after the Gold Hill News era ended?
Well, I guess in two main ways. I got one of the benefits was meeting lots of friends. That was maybe the most important, and also it led me to get my job at Nevada Magazine. In fact, one of the great things David did was the first, in 74, 75, we were bi-weekly, $25 a week, food stamps. During our break, a few months that we took off, he was determined that when we came back that we would make more money and come out weekly. I mean, it kind of went together. And so so when we came back on, we were getting unemployment insurance because we were making over $100 a week, or at least some of us. And so when we closed down in August of 77, I thought, hey, I can get unemployment. All my friends who work construction, it was great. They get the winter off, or a good part of that. So I went down to the unemployment office and signed up. And unfortunately, you might say, but fortunately in others, there was a job for Nevada Magazine on the wall there. And I had to go to it. And I did want to go to it, I must admit. So I got the job pretty quickly. I never did get unemployment. And so I, from the news, there was that. And certainly, and through the news a little bit, I ended up getting to know very slightly my wife, Barbara, and later on we got together much later, but so that was also helpful. So overall, it was great. I don't know if people. I did have some notes on the bragging a little bit about the people who worked on the news and what they did afterwards.
That would be interesting to hear.
Let me see if I can find that real fast. Here it is. It's really pretty amazing, and so much of it would, certainly. Really, David was the one doing. Certainly, of the founders, David had a great career in journalism and in writing and publishing. Also, of course, Peter Lawfer became very well known as a book writer and a radio person, and now teaches up at University of Oregon. Chandler Laughlin remained a legend as Travis T. Hip, of course. Buckeye Blake has gone on to great things as a artist. And on the general staff over those 3 years, I think of Jim Crandall. After beginning, had never really written for anything, just wanted to be a writer, and he joined the news. He ended up working at the Mason Valley News. He worked at Associated Press at the legislature. He worked with me at Nevada. We worked together at Nevada Magazine. And he worked on, in Ottawa, California, the Town Crier. And now he owns his own real estate publication business and does photography, layout. I mean, he's just a great. Roseanne DeCristoforo, of course, did a lot of freelance writing, had her own reporting, legislative reporting company. Barbara Herman, who did the production work. She was the typist to type in the thing. She ended up writing for Associated Press on the weekends and covering the legislature for Associated Press. I mean, she was a great writer. I have to say also Lynn Hughes, who took over Barbara's teletyping work, she was a great writer too. Gary Elam came on. He ended up going on the Sparks Trib. He and his wife started the Comstock Chronicle in Virginia City for many years. Then I worked with him at Nevada Magazine, and then he ended up with his own photography business. Ken Uhas worked at newspapers, became a famous neon artist. Steve Saylor, of course, did the same in Dayton. Karen Wright ended up writing a great deal on gardening and so on. John Packer rose to heights. He began at Harrah's, and he ended up being chief of entertainment for Reno and Tao and communications. He did great. David Fenimore ended up being Shakespeare instructor at UNR. Denny Jones went to the Sparks Trib. Dennis Tristram, I should have mentioned, he was a great columnist at the Reno paper. He ended up covering the legislature for us, and he kind of went the opposite direction. He decided to start a horse packing business, and he worked as a farrier, a horseshoer, after being a great reporter, and columnist. So, just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Yeah, what an amazing assembly of talented people.
The great thing was that the news was a springboard for quite a few, and I've probably forgotten some too, and I apologize in advance. Yeah. So,
do you have a few things you'd like to show us?
Well, I could do this quickly. In the just a couple of issues per year that just kind of caught my eye. One of the interesting things of the first issue, which I had nothing to do with, except making sure we looked more like it, was that they, I believe it was first, did it in a sepia, but David didn't like it because it was just too red. So ended up doing it in the black, which most people see. But if anybody has a red copy, it's probably a collector's item. This artwork by Buckeye Blake was our first tabloid cover. This was probably about 6 or 7, 8 issues in. Then, in this issue, I do want to point out, this was Jim Crandall's great scoop on the church being bulldozed. If you ever see this issue, you can see there's a historical marker right in front of it coming down by the bulldozer. That caused, Jimmy won a best photo of the year for Nevada Weekly in that. In this issue, it just struck me how nice, this was just an example of the local news, which was another big reason people looked at the newspaper. And certainly all the great art and photography, but just getting the local news. That's why the locals certainly did it. And you can see some examples of the cut art, I guess we'd call it, and sports and all sorts of interesting things. This was also in fact, the cover is by Steve Powell, and this was a great scoop because we couldn't avoid not having this scoop when the Silver City Guard took over the bicentennial wagon train, because we had David, who was a member of the Guard, and Gary Elam embedded with the Guard in this, and we had lots of great photos, and it was a really good story. Let's see. This, of course, was a famous cover for us anyway, with by Ed Martinez, who lived in Virginia City, taught at UNR, and this was our swan song for 75. We're going to take a break. One question is with this cover is, I must admit, in the next year, I was looking to see, did Mark Twain really work for the paper? I'm not sure about that. But so we just kind of chuckle at that. But it's a great, great cover. Mainly because, and of course that relates to the slogan of the paper, which is, Mark Twain never worked for this newspaper. And with this, anyway, and this was our See You in Mexico. There's Jan and Darlene and the kids. And that was, we were taking a break. Then we came back with, a few months later, with this great front page with Steve Powell's drawing a sketch of Oscar Bonavena, Denise Gomez, a photo of Joe Conforti. You want to say too, of course, on the cover, this was done by Steve Saylor. This is kind of a Nevada image that he devised. In 76, we also, I don't know exactly who came up with this, probably David. We ended up alternating the regular tabloids each month with a broadsheet paper, which we did mostly as local news. And you can see how big it is. And two pages worth, 4 big pages. And that was fun. Really, it was fun to do. It was mostly local news. It was called the Metropolitan Edition. This was a good one. David had, and I think David probably had this idea. He noted how advertisers often ask us for a page 1 position for their ads. Ordinarily, we must regretfully refuse the request, but this time we have relaxed our policy. And so here we have the cover, in a sense, and then the full first page is covered with ads. So it was a lot of fun.
And the ads are just as fun as some of the clip art and the stories.
They are. They're
just wonderful, and I can't think of many newspapers where I'd say the same thing about their ads.
You are exactly right. They are. Another important, an important area was the declassified ads that we did, and there were a lot of very important advertisers. Very, very important. We kind of joked that we carried the ads, but in hard times and through winter, we were carried by the advertisers. And in fact, there was one I did want to mention was on this newspaper, in this particular issue, this was an ad that Chandler Laughlin came on to be advertising director again. And Chandler not only sold this ad for many issues, it was great, but he also bought a Subaru while he was there. So it was good. And the other important thing here was that this was the first issue of what we call Time Out. It was a special advertising section. event section. Editor was John Packer, and the art director was Steve Saylor. This particular one ends up with a Ken Uhaus poster advertisement in the back. And this was Steve's cover with Glenn Campbell riding high, I guess. And the last one I would mention was, this was the very last issue of the news. I think I helped David proof a little bit, but I really didn't do much on it. And this was more than a year after our last issue. This was in 1978 on Nevada Day, and it was the newspaper's swan song. And this particular ad here, as you can see, says "The End" at the bottom. And David had a wonderful farewell. So anyway, those were some issues. Just wanted to share quickly.
Thank you for the visuals on that, and it shows the different facets of the news really well.
I'm really glad you mentioned the advertisers. And I think in the event that's coming up, we try to display them a little more, and to make sure that they're certainly recognized.
Great, wonderful.
Good. So
very good. Thank you again very much for this,
Sure.
for all you've done to steward the news and share your experiences with people. Really appreciate it, Dave.
Thank you.
So.